Hello, everyone, and welcome to the episode 57 of the Office Hours podcast. I'm back from my short vacation, so everything seems new and fresh. I'm excited to see Mo again. We haven't chatted in a short minute, so I'm excited what he's got for us today. Hey Mo, how you been?
Been good. You've been I bet you were enjoying your vacation.
Yeah,
No?
vacation was nice, certainly nice. I got a little bit of tan, but now comes the time to, the Monday after the vacation where you get back to work and have to dig through like million messages and Slack notifications and all that jazz. So,
Yeah. I mean, most times like when I see like a lot of messages like that, I just go through like the ones that actually probably concern what I'm working on. I don't really I feel like it gets too much, you know? It's like noise at some point,
yeah.
no?
Oh no,
Or
Slack.
it's different for you.
Yeah, Slack is certainly noise. And most automated emails are noise. I just have filters in my Outlook to just shuffle them into various folders that I occasionally kind of look through, but mostly it's like right click, mark all as read,
Yep.
done.
Yep,
Which is
exactly.
which is funny because like so we use Jira, everybody uses Jira, and Jira sends a shit ton of messages all the time. And sometimes they are comments that people leave, but they just get drowned out in all of the other noise that Jira sends. It's like the ticket went from this status to this status. Well, yeah, I put it there. Like I don't care. I can open the page and see where everything's at. So I get
Yeah.
like 50 Jira emails per day. And one of those could be somebody leaving a comment on an issue that you actually need to read. And then that just gets drowned out. And it's like, that's a really crappy user
Mhm.
experience. Like it's drowning me in a sea of useless stuff. And then I miss the useful stuff.
Yeah. You know, I used to wonder like if people actually still come. You know what? I'll ask you. Do you prefer to communicate via emails or via Slack?
Usually via Slack, but like both have issues. Like Slack is good to talk to when you kind of need to talk to somebody right now, but then good luck finding it again if there was something important in that conversation because
Why not?
well, how would you do it?
DMs, no?
Well,
It's
DMs,
in the
yes, but like
DMs.
Slack hides DMs that you haven't talked to in a while, especially if it was a group DM. It just gets like sinking down the list. And then finding that conversation, especially if it was with multiple people, it's like, yeah, forget about it. You're never gonna find it again
Yeah.
unless you like pin it or bookmark it or do something to it, but which you never do because you only be like, oh man,
Yeah.
I talked about this. I wonder where it is. And then the magic starts. It's like messages with me, with these other people mentioning this keyword. And if you're lucky, you're gonna find it. But usually finding stuff in Slack, even having a conversation, like somebody sends you something that's important and then you read it and then it's marked as read, right? Like it doesn't highlight that conversation in the list anymore, and then something like you start maybe looking up some information, then something interrupts you in Slack, you go to that conversation, then another conversation, and it's like, oh yeah, where was that other thing? And you're like frantically pressing the back button hoping you can like jump back into the conversation that you were having with that person. So I resort to marking things as unread so at least they like stay in my sidebar visible,
Okay.
but it's such a drag,
Okay.
right? I like and I don't
Well,
know if there really is a solution to that because, like, yeah, if there was one, we probably would have come up with one by now, I imagine. But
yeah, because I think it works just like other IMs applications will work.
mm,
But I know like if you search for the name of someone in the conversation, I think usually it comes up with like suggestions of like the group conversations that you had with person
yeah,
But the only thing with me is like I think emails nowadays are very. I think maybe it's me who needs to to look at it differently
mm,
because I find that if you really want to talk to me, I'm on Slack.
yeah,
Like if you send me an email, I hope you're praying to God that I find it because I probably I probably didn't look at it in a
mm,
minute. But I mean, you do due diligence to just like, scroll through sometimes, but if it's really important and you want me to see it, I hope it's, I don't even think, I don't expect it to be an email,
I see.
like,
Well, I guess that depends on the culture. I think for most of our stuff, the emails are, the paper trail. Like if something needs to happen, if some decision needs to be made or something of that nature, then it's going to be in the email because it's easier to find, especially if you're
maybe
communicating
culture,
to like upper management and things like that. But
maybe that.
for me, I have like this unread notification anxiety whenever I see like that little number by the icon. I'm like, that's not gonna work. So sometimes, I see
Yeah.
people like they open their Gmail and it's like 7,000 unread messages, and I go like, you know.
I
So
mean,
yeah,
yeah, but anyway, anyway, hopefully you enjoy going through all your messages. Hopefully you find good ones in there.
yeah.
Today, actually, I wanted I was reading about React design patterns.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was reading, making some blog posts about design patterns, but I came across this one
Mm-hmm.
and I gave it a read. That's how you say it, right? Give it a read.
Yeah, you could say
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So I wanted to share it with you because like I felt like yeah, it's React. I hope you like maybe you're interested. I think it's a recent post too. It's like July 23rd,
Okay.
2024. Shout out to the writer. Hopefully, if you find this, good work. Hassan Iftika. I hope I pronounced that properly. Anyway, he made it's a bit comprehensive, but I'm not a React expert, so I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to go through some of what he wrote with you and get your opinion on these concepts as well.
Okay,
I
yeah.
mean,
Let's do it.
you use a lot of design patterns with I mean, of course you have to. Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe not. Anyway, the first one he talked about, and I was trying to compare these patterns to like Angular stuff. So he mentioned custom hook pattern,
Hooks?
and yeah,
Yeah.
custom hook pattern. It was I mean, this is probably very common, like the use state, use effect, and use
Right, right.
context.
Yeah, yeah.
And the interesting thing is he made a list of like when to use it and
Mm-hmm.
when not to use it. So we're saying like when to use it should be like when you're sharing logic between React components without duplicating code.
Right. So,
So
yeah.
how does this so is this like use state, is this supposed to be like you anyway, tell me about it. Like
Okay, so
what's it do?
right. So use state is essentially allowing you to preserve a piece of state, because when you use that hook, it gives you two methods to like, where it rather gives you the current state and the method to update the state. And if you
Mm-hmm.
update the state, it will cause re-rendering, right? And the way the hooks work in React is kind of dark magic. So, but ergonomically, you just have a value and you have a setter, and if you call the setter, it will re-render everything. And normally, you can combine hooks, you can compose hooks into other hooks, and then because a hook is theoretically a function, you can share them. You can use the hook in multiple different components, and they all will have their own instancing for like the stuff inside of them. So like state, context, all of these things. And ever since they've switched to the hooks mode, it's kind of the blessed approach to maintaining state in the application. But me personally, I don't really like it. Mostly because it forces you to intermix logic with presentation. So, we're going back to good old days PHP with templates, where, you have your HTML and then you do a database call right in the middle of it,
That's
because
what
why the hell
okay.
not, right? And I think that We used to write like that because there were no patterns and everybody just made whatever worked and whatever made sense. But eventually, in a large enough code base, you realize it's like, hey, this is just not workable when you have, your because the way PHP worked is like the client hits the web server, the server runs the script, and script effectively writes the output back to the client. So you just like you need to write some HTML, like you write like, oh, head, blah, 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 title in style, and then body, and then, you run some code, and then you render the output of that code, and it all just streamed back to the client normally, right? So that was reasonable. It worked. But from maintainability perspective, it was really bad because, you have like these includes from other files. And so eventually it's like, let's separate the presentation and the logic. They came up with like MVC, MVVM, like all of these different patterns of separating views and logic and presentation and all these things. And now React is like, nah, put it all back. It'll be fine. Right. So I'm not necessarily a fan of that. I use it sparingly. Like if a component needs like a single Boolean piece of state, internally, like I don't know, if like it's an accordion or something and it just needs to maintain whether it's open or not, it's like, okay, fine, yeah, we can use state for that. But anytime it comes to any kind of complex logic where you need to do like server requests, all of these kinds of things, as soon as you start putting it into the UI and it's just bolted on top of that UI, it's eventually becomes quite a pain to deal with. So I'm not a big fan. And I try to use hooks really sparingly. And we did have hooks for sharing the logic, but most of these were pretty primitive. It's usually just having like some sort of container that exposes like some sort of API to share specific data pieces. So, instead of saying, you can say, oh, I have a hook that the state that stores like session variables. We would like create a use session hook, and then internally it just uses the same state again. So just by name, it makes more sense. And overall, I don't know. I'm not sold on hooks, and especially in the direction where it's going, where they're doing some weird async magics. They want to propose this use keyword where you give it an asynchronous function, but you do not await it, and it internally does like magical stuff to make it work. And I don't know. I'm not a fan. It hides complexity, and I don't like when people hide complexity and pretend it doesn't exist. Yeah. And I
Um,
don't really know what the closest pattern in Angular would be for
yeah,
hooks. I don't think it exists in there because it's just entirely different rendering architecture.
actually, I think it does because like because I think I've seen how use state and these hooks works a little bit, but for sure, like I think it's more like a dependency injection on our side. Like, you
No,
know,
not at all.
uh,
I would
I would
say
probably
not.
compare. So,
Because,
for example,
yeah,
the reason why I'm comparing it is because, like you said, like say, for example, use state. Let's say you have two components who happen to. So, for example, if you have a component that needs to know the source of the data, and two components are using the same source of data, but one is processing the data for the other one to observe the processed data, to take like the processed data, and you don't want to like duplicate the logic in in the two places. So probably you can do this in Angular. Maybe you can use like a service.
yeah,
So
yeah,
you have the logic somewhere, and both of them can probably like subscribe to this logic,
right,
and
right,
you can inject this service in both of them, in
right.
the two components probably. So this is why
Yeah,
I want to compare it to dependency injection, but I don't. I think so.
well, I think dependency injection uh, has a specific meaning that is not really. We're not really
Yeah, in
talking about
Angular.
dependency injection. Like, I mean, in Angular, you would call it a service, the fact that Angular does dependency injection to provide that service to a component is like besides the point. But yeah, I guess you can have a
What do you
service.
mean?
Well,
What do you mean? Yeah.
well, dependency injection is a specific mechanism for
Mm-hmm.
resolving dependencies
Mm-hmm.
where you say, and it comes like from the world of Java, where you have like an interface, an abstract interface that says, here's the properties and methods of some entity. And then there could be multiple different implementations of that interface, and dependency injection says, for this particular class, when it's instantiated, which implementation am I going to pick? And that gets wired up like separately. So you don't have explicit dependencies, you have resolvable dependencies. It's just mechanism of providing objects to other objects when they're getting created. So it has nothing really to do with what's inside of them or how they're used. And like Angular is using dependency injection for that, but you know, you could have it's a different thing. It's unrelated to state itself. It's just a method of providing things to other things, right? So I think calling it dependency injection versus hooks is kind of misnomer a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So hooks doesn't work the same way.
Well, hooks, you just import a hook using a regular. So when you use a hook, you have to say import use something from some file, right? And then you use it.
Mm-hmm.
But in Angular, you say, I am consuming a certain type. So you're not saying I'm consuming this particular object. I'm consuming a type that corresponds to that object. And then dependency injection will transparently pull that in. So you never explicitly import your
You do.
dependencies inside the file itself. Like the DI
You
mechanism will
do.
do it for you.
No, you actually do. So you probably will import the file and then you define it in the constructor and then you can use it. So like you can have access to it when the component
Right,
actually
but but
loads.
but you're not pulling in an instance of a thing. You're pulling in an interface or type. I don't remember. Anyway, but it's a different thing, and it's
Yeah,
kind of besides
maybe.
the point right now. So
Anyway,
let's not get in
yeah,
the weeds of DI
yeah.
and all of that
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
I got really curious about it actually. So I was thinking about how it worked.
Hmm.
But another one that caught my attention was the higher order component.
Right.
The
So,
And I compared this one to directives,
mhm.
directives in Angular. But you know about directives, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I don't. Again, I'm not really sure if directives. I think are more kind of mix-ins because you can attach multiple directives to the same component, and as long as they don't conflict with one another, in theory, it'll all work out. Whereas higher order components, they're like analogous to higher order functions. It's like components that take other components as parameters, right? So you can wrap things with a higher order component that does like some bits of shared functionality, which is it's yeah you use that. I mean, I'm not really sure if I have too much to say about that. Then yeah.
Is it the our guy?
Mm-hmm.
I'll read out what he said about it.
Okay.
Um, he gave some examples and like 1 second. So he said like when to use it is like when to separate presentation logic from business logic in a component.
Mm-hmm.
And he was also saying like when not to use it is like when the logic is specific to a single component and it won't be reused.
Mm.
I guess this makes sense. This is why I compared it to directives, because
I
like
see.
this is pretty much why what we do with directives. Like if you want to change like a logic, like it's pretty much the same thing. To be honest, in the explanation of this guy, like it sounds like directives to me, but maybe I don't really understand the patterns like
Yeah. Yeah.
in
I, I,
React
I
enough
think I
to
think
make a
that
direct comparison.
when he says it's for separating business logic from presentation, I don't know if it's necessarily a higher order component in that sense, because usually, so there's another pattern which is like this the split between smart components and dumb components. And dumb components
Mm,
take props and render props and don't necessarily contain any business logic within them. They are fully controlled by external props, right? Like for instance, you could have a dumb component that presents like a user profile with like a picture, a name, and a bio or whatever, right? And
mhm.
it doesn't have any logic within it. Like it's not gonna go to your profile service and asks like, give me this data for this user, right? It's just concerned with just the rendering. So it's really easy, and you can plug it in anywhere as long as the contract is fulfilled props wise. And then the smart component is a component that doesn't necessarily have any rendering besides the dumb component that it's presenting, and all of the logic is encapsulated within, so there's like some degree of separation. uh
So,
would that be considered
so
a higher order component? Only if the render, like if whatever thing it's supposed to render is provided to it from outside, I would say it's a higher order component. uh and in that type of circumstance, it might be hard to find a lot of uses for it. It's like if you need to render same piece of information many different ways, you can have a component that like loads it in the correct form and then defers to something else to render it. In which case, it takes like, I don't know, you have like some profile fetcher thing that fetches the profile and then passes it on to another thing that renders it. So that's going to be like a high order smart component, and then the dumb component will be whatever is doing the actual rendering. So yeah, you
okay,
could do that.
yeah, okay, yeah. I think maybe it might be different concept
Mm-hmm.
because directives actually like you use it to add like extra behaviors to like the components.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you are not exactly creating a new component with a directive.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Directive modifies existing component, and higher order
mhm,
components wrap other components. So they are like a superstructure, whereas
yeah,
directive is like meddling within components affair itself, sort of. But yeah, it's been a while since I done directives. But like for directives in
okay,
Angular, you can say, oh, I don't know, change the rendering of this thing to render in bold if the Boolean flag is true or something like that. So actually, in the
hmm,
directive, you have access to the component, like the renderer function, and you can wrap it in some way. But yeah.
yeah, you could do that, and you can actually like put like extra logic. Let's say um you want to change how it maybe do some extra calculations, or like you want to do some extra logic on a particular information,
Hmm.
like how the component should work. You could use the directive for this. I think we also have like something else, like pipes. We also
Yeah.
have pipes
Yeah.
for this. But they work differently. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
don't think it's like HOC.
Yeah, Angular
I don't
has
think
all
it's.
of these abstractions that React doesn't have, so it's hard to make one-to-one parallels between
Hmm.
different functionalities. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So he says something else like about disadvantages. He mentioned that excessive HOC composition can create complex components that are difficult to debug. Do you agree?
I would say so, but for most part, I think it's kind of, yeah. Usually, if you have components that are wrapped multiple times, it gets kind of tricky. But even then, because in React, like if you open any kind of React application in DevTools, in React DevTools, you're gonna see like 25 different providers in a hierarchy, and then the actual
Mm-hmm.
rendering like happens later. So it's just like provider, 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 and then you have
Mm-hmm.
actual code. So I think it's okay. You probably wouldn't want to attach too many things to the same component, because now the other thing that is kind of fashionable is using attributes to so you code your HOC as an attribute, and then when you return something, you just say, you know, uh, export class blah, and then you wrap it in .hoc, you know.
Mhm.
And it gets crazy if you have like multiple of these stacked on top of one another, because like the order matters and it's just going to wrap it and it might affect rendering. So keep it simple whenever
Fair enough.
possible, which is not always possible, right?
Fair enough. Um, Quick question, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
How do you call it in like smart and dumb component? I heard you use the word just now.
Yeah.
Like, do you also call it like container and presentational components,
Well,
or
I think
you
those
think
are
they're different?
equivalent. Like the dumb component is a presentational component, and smart component, I guess you could say. I haven't heard the term container component, but like it fits. I think it's just like if you want to be more politically correct and not use words like smart and dumb, then you use more vague, abstract words.
Yeah, yeah. I I found out like some people actually prefer to refer to it like this,
Mm.
container component. And I think I understand it better. Like if you say it like this to
Well,
in
any
a
component is a container component because it contains something else. Like naming is precise. So,
well, I think yeah, but container components will probably contain components. But this is
well,
not what I'm
see,
saying. It will contain yeah,
it
components.
doesn't really
Yeah.
explain
See.
anything. It's like, anything is a container if you put something inside of it.
Mm.
So, are you saying that in your entire application, 99% of it is container component and like the leaf nodes at the very bottom of the
No, but
hierarchy are not? You know.
there are components that actually do logic.
Yeah. Well,
Or
you can say
like
logic
they
components and presentation components maybe, but smart and dumb works for me. It's short and quick to say.
fair enough. Fair enough, fair enough. I saw the render props pattern.
Mm.
The do you remember how this works?
Render props. Can you describe it? Because I probably do, but again, it's one of those things that name is one thing, but what it does is actually different.
For sure. So it was like render props pattern in React allows sharing code between components by using a prop that is a function. And this
Oh,
pattern
okay.
delegates the responsibility of rendering a part of the component to the function provided as a prop,
Yeah,
enabling greater use and flexibility.
yeah,
Does that make
maybe
sense?
it does make sense. Um, I guess it kind of goes back to like, okay, well, I mean, a render props, that's a higher order component. Like if it takes a function to render its contents, that's a higher order component. So we're back to the same thing. I guess the thing is like the component can take multiple different props with different functions to render different things. Because with React, you have props, and one special prop is called children, right? So you can have a closed tag with props, or you can have a tag that has its own content, and that will be inside children. And so in Angular, a popular pattern is to you have like some container component, and then you would have like container dot child type. So maybe you have like a table, and then a children of the table would be like table dot row, right? And then inside table dot
Mm,
row, its children could be table dot cell. And then Angular internally, when it iterates over those children, it can look at the type of the thing and decide where to place it in the rendering hierarchy. So I've encountered that pattern in Angular quite a lot, where you essentially limit the types of children certain things could have. Like you cannot just put any arbitrary things into it. Or maybe you have like a page component, and then inside you only allow page.sidebar and page.content because they're like rendered side by side. And then within those, you can put whatever. But those two specifically are the only permissible children of page, let's say. In React, you would probably end up using something like render props, where you would say page, and then, you would say content equals, content, and then sidebar equals sidebar. So you don't pass it as children, you pass it as props. But it's kind of a moot point. It really matters on
what?
how you want to organize it.
What did you say? It's kind of a moot point?
Moot. M-O-O-T, moot, meaning
Oh, okay.
vague, or
Yeah,
rather
because
not worthy of going into distinctions, because who cares anyway.
well, I mean, I thought you said moo point. That reminded me of
Friends,
yeah, Friends,
the
Joey.
cow says moo, who cares? Pretty much.
Yeah, but I understood the render pros pattern, like say you passing a function to a component to control what it renders, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, this is not. I'm not sure if I understood like the entire picture of what you how you described it, but if if it means like just passing like a function to a component to control what it renders, I think for us in Angular we could probably use like some directives for that as well,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe like ng templates thereabout. Or we also have
Yeah, because with the ng template you
like
have slots, right? You can say this thing goes here, that
yeah,
thing goes there.
yeah,
But with Angular,
if
there's
this is
no slots, at least not natively. So people have to figure
with
out a
React, you
way.
mean?
Huh?
With React, you mean?
Yeah. React doesn't support slots as like the framework abstraction. You have to implement something on top of it to give you that.
Mm,
And I think render props is kind of the closest thing to slot, where you would the parent component renders some markup and then inserts things in different parts of that markup, and then this function gets inserted here and that function gets inserted there. So that is sort of what it is, at least in my opinion.
yeah, maybe. You know, I'm gonna have to read more about these things because I'm writing about it,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm enjoying just like doing this comparison and just learning more about like some of these concepts in React. I have not really had like a lot of reasons to write React in a while, and when I watch like tutorials or like maybe I come across someone saying something interesting about it, I tend to pay attention. You never know. Some of this comes in handy sometimes.
Yeah.
I think um I had I think like maybe who knows, maybe there will be an opportunity to work in React soon, maybe, but I kind of find it interesting, especially React and Angular seems to have really caught my attention a lot. I never really care much about Vue, but it used to be a big deal at some point.
Yeah.
Did you ever try
No, I never really, because Vue is supposed to be kind of like Angular JS before like Angular TypeScript took over in some ways. But I never
it?
really I can't say that I missed Angular JS enough to try Vue. React was plenty for me as it was.
The last time I ever did anything with Vue was probably like 2020,
Mm,
probably.
yeah.
And that was a long time ago. I mean, not so long, but it's still long. It's a few years ago for sure.
Yeah,
Like,
but the thing is, again, the Vue, I haven't paid too much attention to it, but just from reading some of the stuff online, it seems like they've kind of, and I could be wrong, but that's just my interpretation of it, but they kind of repeated Python's mistake where they have like Vue version 2 and then they have Vue version 3 with the composition API, which completely like breaks everything and it's not backwards compatible. So
mm,
and it's just like, oh man, if they're doing that, like, what else are they gonna break going forward? Like, I don't want to sign up for that.
yeah, I remember Python was really funny at the time. Like, you have Python 3 and then Python 3 point something, 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 and then you have Python 2
Yeah,
and Python 2 point something, something, and they are
yeah,
two,
they're different.
they
They're
are not.
different. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
I mean,
Even now,
I,
I see the stuff. It's like, oh, if you have Python 3.8, then do this, and if you have Python 3.10, then do that. And it's just like, man, why would you make me? Why would you make me do this?
yeah.
I don't know. Um,
I think I was reading recently, like, was it Google or some big company recently just like closed down the entire Python
hmm.
team.
No,
Like, they
I
had a
haven't heard
Python
that.
project. It was a few months ago, to be honest. And then it got me thinking, I was wondering, like, um, do do we have problems using it in in web, or I never really looked into it, to be
Yeah,
fair. I
yeah,
just saw it on Twitter and I moved past it. But
yeah.
anyway, coming back to what we're talking about, our guy, he was saying he listed a few things about when to use it and when not to use it. I'll read some of it out. I want to, for your opinion, for sure. He was saying like when to use a render props pattern would be to when you're, of course, like when sharing rendering logic between multiple components. So I think
I guess
maybe
it
this.
kind of sounds a little bit vague. The thing is, I don't know. I've yet to encounter an application where there's like a lot of sharing of logic that's going on, like a lot, where it warrants building a pattern besides like, oh, we have two pieces of logic that are being shared here and we're just going to put them into a hook or something. But the setup is always like, oh man, it's going to be so awesome. You can just take this code and move it else, like you can just plug this thing here and plug that thing there and it's all going to work. And in practice it like they're never exactly the same. There's always some tiny differences between them, so it warrants kind of having specific functions to deal with that stuff. And I don't know, the promise of reusability, I've yet to see it fully materialize. Everybody's like gung-ho about reusable this and reusable that, and in practice the reusability of things is so tiny unless it's like something super basic. It's like, yeah, if you have a component for a button, you reuse it everywhere. Fair enough. But, you have design systems for that. But when it comes to things with actual business logic that is specific to the application you're building, barely any reusability, if at all. So, again, I don't want to be buying in some pattern that promises some glorious returns, and I never see the day. I never live to see the day when those returns actually happen. So you put a lot of effort up front to have it all laid out. You put all this extra effort and all this extra consideration for some magical reusability further down the line, and it never happens. And you're just like, well, okay, I've wasted all of this time and increased complexity at the same time. So,
I'm gonna put you on the spot here and ask you a question, yeah?
okay.
Because because I had a conversation with someone like not too long ago. We were talking about we're having just a random conversation about like work, how you work, like how you prefer to work. And I was saying like for me, I prefer to put in the extra effort to use the tool that I'm using, how it was it was it is expected to be used,
Right.
you know. And so if I have to create, let's say, of course, in TypeScript, you have like types, and then you have to create an interface to use as a type, something like this, like, and then sometimes some people will create an interface and leave it in the same folder as your actual component class. And this to me, I don't like to see this. I like to see just component logic. I don't want to see I feel like interfaces should have their own separate location, just like you have like your mocks. You have a mock file, and then you keep your mocks in a separate file. So this to me, they are where you should keep everything,
Yeah.
right? But I learned that some people, as long as like what they're doing works, like the best practices or like whatever any other thing that
Yeah.
that that has to do with like the extras,
Mm.
doesn't really mean much. But and we had this conversation. The reason why I'm actually talking about it is because I felt a bit guilty. I felt like maybe maybe um I might be a bit how do you use there's a word for it, like this person, like it's not OCD.
Mm.
It's just like It's just like I don't know how to describe it. It's just like for me, I see it and I will point it out.
Hmm.
If you fix it or not, this is not a problem. Like I just will show you. That's it.
Right.
But um the guy I was talking with was just like trying to explain to me that maybe some people might have a different way to do this, and this does not mean anything. It's just like the people have different ways to work.
Right.
So I wanted to, when you were just talking about this,
Yeah.
using in this state, it made me remember this. Like, yeah, maybe this is one of the things that this guy was talking about. Because, like, if it works well, if you use other ways to do it, why not?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, so in terms of placement of things, I'm a big fan of locality and like things that, things that should be living together or things that are logically relatable should be living closer to one another, right? So I'm not going to have like slash src folder with some structure and then slash types folder that mimics the src folder structure just to keep that stuff separate. It's like if I have a component and I have a bunch of interfaces for its props, yeah, they should live together. I don't need to be looking for things beyond what makes sense. Like if I have a component for a sidebar, I don't want to go and search for sidebar props like somewhere completely different. That just doesn't make sense to me. Like I want for them to be
Mhm.
close to one another. Not necessarily in the same file if it's too big, but at least in the same barrel export you would have, the
Yeah,
props
of course.
types and stuff like that.
Of
In
course.
terms of best
But,
practices, you have to understand that what is the best practice for Facebook with how many thousands developers they have is not going to be the same best practice as for a 3-person team that are building a tiny project, right? Like it has to be appropriate for the thing you're building, right? If you're just making I don't know, tiny wooden cars as toys, you don't need the facilities of Tesla and practices and patterns of Tesla to do that, right? It just does not apply. It like you have to be at a certain state or certain stage of your project where applying like heavy artillery patterns starts becoming necessary, right? If it's a 1-person thing and you try to
mhm.
spend all of this time up front coming up with all of these patterns, and I was guilty of it. It's like, oh man, I'm gonna apply like all of these things. I'm gonna make sure everything's right for when in the future certain class of problems will be mitigated by that, and then that future never comes, and you just wasted all of your time doing that. So I'm
Okay.
I'm more like it's a fine line to thread between the two extremes, because if everything is
Mhm.
growing organically, it turns into a very messy thing that's really hard to deal with. But if you start putting yourself into like some rigid structure from the get-go, you're wasting all of this effort and time and all of these things for something that could potentially never happen. So we talked about it in very early podcasts, right? It's like time to market is crucial for a startup. And if you're going to be polishing the turd for 6 months before you actually write anything productive, your competition is going to knock you out. So at that time, you go ahead and you put stuff out. So for me, I think the best approach is, you know, you do a burst of organic development and then you do a refactoring pass where you try to kind of figure out what patterns emerge from what you're doing and formalize them, and kind of like all the rough edges where it doesn't quite fit, you figure out a way to make it so. And it you sort of switch between the two. Because again, if you're putting way too many constraints on
Mhm.
yourself, it's like, oh, we have to adhere to the pattern. I can't just write a component. No, I need to write 25 files to go with it, with everything. And then it's like, you could do that, but your progress is going to be so slow. Everyone's just going to be not having any fun working on that.
Mm, You know, I mm, I think I see it differently, but I will explain what I mean. I see it differently because right now you said like you could do like something functional, and then in the future you get to refactor it based on how it came out. I feel that future usually never comes.
When you do
And
the refactoring,
yeah,
yeah,
this
that's true.
refactoring
That's also true. I'm saying
and
ideally how I would do it, it would be like that.
and also I understand like if you work in a I guess like if you work in a startup company, I don't know where this person works actually. I'm not sure it's a startup company. Anyway, if you work in a startup company and you have like the press for speed, I can understand this. Like I mean, I think I have some experience working in a startup company. And I can understand the press for speed and like yeah, I'll just get it out and like let's go to the customers. But I think if you work in a company where you have the opportunity, you know, of some luxury of some extra time, I feel not only like I mean at the end of the day, maybe nobody even cares, really. Honestly, I don't even know if anyone
The
cares.
customers
It's
don't
just
mostly. They don't give a
yeah,
crap about the patterns or lack of patterns as long as they can do what they want to do.
yeah, but at the end of the day, what hurts is like if there is like multiple people that work on the same repository, the fact that we all share a repository in if you work in a team, by the
Yeah.
way, like
Yeah.
you I'm not in this person's head to understand how they were thinking about this writing, you know? I wasn't sitting next to you
Yeah.
to remember how you were thinking
Yeah. Yeah.
about it or
No,
like how you were
I
doing
see what you're saying.
it. So,
There should be some organizational principle.
do you understand? So like if there is like if we are following the principles,
Yes.
which is going to be like the rule book of how to do this,
Yeah.
then it will
Yeah.
be easier for anyone to come and understand like yeah okay this
Yeah.
is where
Yeah.
if I'm looking for let's say I'm looking for something like a network call, I don't want to be seeing the network call inside the component. I
Yeah,
would
no,
prefer to see it
that is all
somewhere
fair.
else.
I think that these are more basic and true. However, even I if I develop something from scratch, it all starts with like index.ts. Everything's in one file, right? Because
Mhm.
and the problem with overly rigid structures is that your requirements constantly change. And one day, and it happened to me a whole bunch of times. One day, somebody comes in and says, we need to implement X. And you like, oh shit, our architecture does not support it at all. We have to break everything to support
Yeah.
that. And so
Hmm.
tying yourself down to something very rigid has a risk because in software, the requirements change all the time. The other interesting consequence of that is that do not build things literally, especially when it comes to components. Like that is the worst thing you can do. And you know, we had this issue where we would get some designs from design team for some components, and then we would implement them literally. Like the names of properties would map to that design, and then they reuse the design for something else where those names make no sense at all, and we're like, oh shit. Now we have this thing called, I don't know, medication name, and it has nothing to do with medication. It's just a slot in a template that holds like some bolded text, and it's like,
Hmm.
frick, you know, now we
Hmm.
can't. We can reuse it, but in code, it's not going to make any sense because we called it way too literally and way too explicitly. It should be more vague. And yeah, so same thing with pattern. You marry yourself to a pattern, and then you know you lose half your stuff in the divorce.
Maybe. Honestly, maybe. I think maybe. Honestly, I feel like there should be some maybe just find the best one that works
Yeah,
because
yeah. I think
I
that
remember
yeah, explicit, small explicit process and structure is better than implicit one. But if it's overbearing, if there's like way too many rules that you have to remember, it starts getting really difficult to navigate through, and making changes also becomes difficult. Like it kind of comes back to the whole thing of, you know, you have to really know rules well before you can bend them or break them. Like you're not supposed to start breaking rules and bending rules if you don't understand why they're there in the first place. It's kind of same, you know. Everybody
Yeah.
has to have an agreement on conceptually what's a good thing and what's a bad thing. It's like don't keep network code inside components. That's a good thing. But if you have like 25,000 different rules of what you should not do and do, it's just going to become so hard to deal with. It's like use your best judgment. Don't be a dummy, you know, like
That, that's a very good. Just be yourself, right? No.
well, you know, the problem is that you know, I think seniors, because they've gone through that process many times, they
Mm-hmm.
bumped into all of these corners a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So we just have the mental capacity to immediately not do the things. But juniors, because they haven't had a chance to, you know, knock their shin into the edge of the bed frame, you know,
Maybe.
25
Maybe.
times, and then decide like, yeah, I'm never gonna be buying beds with the wooden thing around the perimeter because oh, my other light went out as expected. I should probably wrap it up soon because it's gonna look bad. But yeah, like they still do all of these mistakes, and then you have to come in and be like, you don't want to do that because of all these reasons. So that's the balancing line.
Yeah, and I also think that I think at the end of the day, you can only be one contributor. So I guess you follow what works for your team. But for me, I guess maybe it's the culture that I've been working with for a long time now, like for a few years now. Like these things, like when it comes back in reviews, you you don't really want to be trying to argue about it. You know, like it's
Yeah,
like you should know that these things should not be like this. You
you
understand?
get a
Like so
certain degree of irritation from it for sure. You're like, oh man,
so
come on.
so you just already know it. So now for me, over the years, I feel like it's just something that I see and I just see it and I just even sometimes when I'm watching a YouTube tutorial, like somebody writing code in a tutorial or like a Udemy course or something, and I just see certain things, and I'm trying to yell at the person inside me. I'm trying to yell at the person and be like, what? Please fix it, you know? But I guess it just comes up and become part of you at some point. But it is what it is. I think at the end of the day, you just have to do what works
Yeah,
for your team and for your project.
yeah,
And
no, that's fair.
if,
But I see that too. It's like I find it really irritating where people don't know how to use their tool properly. It just bothers me. It's like whenever I see somebody like using, I don't know, they're using Microsoft Word and they need to put something in the middle of the page, and then they just start hitting the space bar a bunch to like move it to the right. I'm like,
yeah, oh yeah.
I want to strand. It's like it literally takes
Yeah,
one click and then it looks
yeah,
good. And like, how can you be not willing to actually learn how to use the tool that you have properly? First of all, you're gonna be much faster at it,
mhm.
and you know, it's just like, why don't you write everything in Notepad if you're gonna be doing shit like that? You know?
Do you understand? So this is exactly. So this listen. This is it. So like, I think we are saying it the same way, kind of, but maybe it's just because, like, maybe I have a different picture in my head and I'm not describing it properly. But I think at the end of the day, we probably might say it the same way. Because if you could do, you know, the one that actually kind of gets to me is like, if you know how to use it, but you choose not to use it, how
How
you
it's
should you
intended. Yeah,
really?
yeah.
Yeah, this is the word that gets to me. Like, it's not like you don't know, you know, but you just choose not to do it
Yeah.
just
I
because.
mean, there are some cases when you kind of have to, you know, color outside the lines, so to speak. But again, you have to know it really well to understand when it's appropriate and when it's not. So
Yeah.
that's a like a finer art form of doing that.
Yeah.
But yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, man, when people use text editors in various videos and like not leverage them to their full potential, it's just like, oh my God, come on.
Did you ever write Java codes with Notepad? Or like,
Uh
did you ever?
okay, so back in the day when I was writing PHP, I was using a Midnight Commander for the file manager, and I still do. Okay, like I don't do everything on command line. Occasionally, I like whip up the Midnight Commander.
What is this?
Uh,
Should I look it up?
no, I mean you could. In the DOS days, we used to have Norton Commander, which was like the two-panel file manager,
Mm-hmm.
where you can open two different directories in two panels and
Mm-hmm.
then like copy files between them or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Midnight Commander is basically the same thing, only for Linux. And it has a built-in editor, and built-in editor had syntax highlighting, and that's about it. And I was building stuff for years just using Midnight Commander editor when I was doing like PHP. And when I switched to ASP.NET, obviously back then you had to use Visual Studio, and so I
Yeah,
switched to
they were
Visual
cool.
Studio. Yeah,
Visual Studio was like for the cool kids at the time.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
at my own time, I'm speaking for myself, but because at my own time, Visual Studio was. I remember I started like with Notepad, and then
Notepad++.
we got Notepad plus plus
A lot of
plus.
people use Notepad++.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and then you have to do like the with the Javac compiler,
Java C. Yeah,
like yeah, Java's anyway. So I just remember. I don't even know why I remember. Oh yeah, because we were talking about Notepad. Yeah, that's why.
yeah,
I just remember this now, and I was wondering, like, life is so good now, huh?
yeah. I
Like we
mean,
have,
yeah, like a lot of people went from Notepad++ to Sublime. Have you used Sublime?
yeah, but not for long. But I
And
think,
again, they had like Sublime 2 and Sublime 3, and plugins were incompatible between one another or something like that. And then there was Atom, right?
yeah, Adam was quite.
Atom
It
was
did.
quite a big departure, and it gave us a lot of the niceties that we have today. I think even language servers as a thing kind of came out of Atom, like the whole concept of not letting the editor itself do the syntax highlighting and analysis and all of these things, but rather extract it and communicate via protocol. It might have been heavily influenced by Atom. And then from Atom, I guess everybody switched to VS Code. Uh,
Yeah, and VS Code, they don't look like. I mean, there is this new guy that came out recently. I don't know if it's new, but it became popular recently. Cursor. Have you tried it?
which one?
Cursor
Cursor?
ID. Yeah,
No.
something cursor or
I mean,
something.
I still use Vim inside terminal. I don't even look into the
Come
fancy
on,
things.
Vasily, it's 2024. You
Yeah,
should change with the time,
life is
no?
good. Life is good in Vim
It's
and Tmax land. You know.
you know what? I understand because like I have this coworker as well. He's always every time we have to do something together, he's like, "Oh yeah, you should learn how to use the command line." I'm like, "Well, I mean, I can run my codes in the command line. I don't have to live in the command line, like."
You should be able to. I mean, he's not wrong.
He's not wrong, but you know,
Well,
if you could
so
do it outside of the command line, why not? So, for
things,
example,
it's faster usually,
is it?
and it's composable. The beauty of Unix command line is that it's composable. Like, how many times I need to aggregate some throwaway data, and I don't want to write a specific program for it. I'll just pipe shit a bunch through like grep and awk and
Mm.
all of these other tools, and I have my data in like matter of 5 minutes.
It feels like 5 minutes. Yeah, when you have I mean,
That's
I'm speaking from my
just get
experience.
good. Get good, scrub. It's a skill issue.
It feels like 5 minutes if you
If you know what you're doing.
use it. Yeah, I mean, if you know what you're doing,
Yeah, well,
maybe you
that's why
could
you
do it.
should learn, so that it once you
But if you could do this, so for example, let's say you want to create a data dump,
yeah,
like a data dump. You could click this in 3 clicks. literally, depending on your database tool, probably 3 to 4 clicks, and you have your maybe maybe with an extra typing, you have your dump saved in your document. But then you have to do the same thing. I'm not saying it's not
Well, I
good,
mean,
but you
how about this? Like, you have some log files, and
there
because
for
they're
sure there are
rotated,
certain
half of
types.
them are going to be gzipped and half of them are not going to be gzipped. And then you need to understand for some specific date range what IP addresses were connecting to your system. It's like you can do that fairly trivially in command line using just built-in tools. But I'd like to see you try doing that using GUI tools. It's like, yeah, just
Listen,
good luck with that.
there are certain cases where for sure using a command line is probably like the best thing to do. It's the smart thing to do. But there are also certain cases that they've made our lives easy. I mean, what I'm trying to say is for you, I feel like in my own generation of devs, we got lucky to have GUI
Kids these days.
and
Back in my day.
we got lucky to have GUI stores. The person I'm talking about also like is maybe he's probably from your generation, I would imagine.
Mm.
And I feel like, yeah, this is why I think he also tells me to use Vim, and he also has another tool he calls like I forgot the name now, but yeah, these are just like
Tmux,
well,
probably Tmux.
yeah, Emacs,
Oh, Emacs? No,
Emacs,
Tmax.
yeah. No, he said something about Emacs. I remember he
Well, if
mentioned
he
like
suggested you to use Vim, I highly doubt he would also suggest to use Emacs, as those things are in constant opposition and have been for the last
I
30
am
years.
I'm pretty sure we talked about Emacs like a year ago,
Mm.
and he was like, "Well, yeah, it's really good. Like, if you use it, you're gonna like it." And I
Yeah,
was
yeah.
like, "Well,
The only,
well."
as the joke goes, the only thing that's missing from Emacs is a good text editor.
I don't even know. Anyway, well, I'm good, but I feel like maybe I wonder what it's going to look like in like what development is going to look like in the next 10 years, I imagine. I feel like I wonder how they will work because especially now that there's like AI in every IDE now, and everywhere you can just like spit out codes from anything. You're not really if you really know what you're doing, if you probably like it doesn't take as much effort as it used to. So
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what it's going to look like in the future. So
Well, I
maybe
don't know, but I know that Vim is still going to be there in 10 years'
I hope
time.
so. I hope so.
You know, the
We'll be here and I will remind you.
the things that have been around for a while have a higher chance of, remaining. But the
I
new
think it will
things
be
that haven't
together.
been around for a while, they have a very high chance of not surviving. So I
Like
can I
what?
can bet on Vim being there in 10 years. I don't necessarily know if
Like what?
VS Code is going to be there in 10 years.
You know what? I will actually bet on VS Code to be there in 10 years, except Microsoft crumble, which does not seem to be a
Well,
possibility.
yeah, so far, but you know, no empires are forever. We are learning that. So
Well, we'll see. Anyway, Vasily, it's
anyway,
really
well,
nice chatting with you. With even though you had the light thing, and I
yeah,
should have let you go all this while, but I was enjoying talking to you.
yes,
So
yes. We'll do it
I took
again
some more
soon.
time.
All
Yeah,
right. Well, thanks everyone for staying with us, and I hope you enjoyed what we were talking about. And let us know in the comments if you put all of your code in just a single file with 100,000 lines and live carefree, or you have some framework that necessitates having 25,000 nested folders to make sure that everything's located appropriately.
well,
With that in
let us know.
mind, yeah, we'll see you in the next one. Bye.